Hi, investors. It's Nick, and I'm going to do a very quick walk through the calculations that we've got in that we're using for the cash purchases. So just to give you context on this, the market has obviously shifted. It's gone from very heated to pretty cold, relatively speaking. The market's still holding up because there's such a depth of demand for property that decent properties that are in reasonable condition are definitely selling. And we've seen this because we've done the analysis recently. But what's now happening is that properties that are either fundamentally not good. No, these may be properties that are in bad locations, for example, beside railways or motorways or sewage works, or maybe they've got some structural problem, or maybe they're just in a very high crime area. But any of those kind of properties which have what I could describe as location issues, they're not really selling. Then you've got another bucket of properties which have no location problems. In other words, location wise, everything's good, but they need a lot of renovation. And what we're seeing is very nice properties in need of extensive modernization, but not necessarily structural work, because based on our calculations and our ROI, structural work, i.e., opening up a back room or adding an extension onto a house, those kind of things, they tend not to really give you a better yield or a better return on investment. So typically what we're always looking for are properties that have a good layout, but need a lot of renovation. And as I said, don't have structural issues. And if all those things are good, then what we're doing these days is we're just watching. Obviously, we're checking out the property, we're watching, we're talking to the agent, we're finding out whether it's a motivated seller, whether they're prepared to discount, and then we wait. And at some point, we either find that they want to offer at our price that we're willing to go in at, or not. And if they're not, well, that's fine. We move on to the next property. And as time goes by, as this recession gets harsher and harsher, there are more and more people effectively who need to sell houses. The buyers aren't coming along because they don't want to purchase, and because for an end user, for an owner occupier, should I say, they're much better off putting their cash into more deposit or into more deposit for a mortgage and going that way about things. So anyway, let's have a look at the calcs. And this is where I get slightly nerdy, but anyway, the reason the calculations are so valuable is because they help us get our bearings very quickly on property. So we've got a typical property here, we've got the rent, and we've got what we believe would be the renovation cost. Now that's usually quite conservative. In other words, it's higher than we hope it'll be, but we put in a big number at the beginning because we want to make sure that if things do move forward, the deal works at a maximum renovation of whatever it is. And then we do an estimate on valuation when renovated. And then this is quite important to us because once we've got the square meterage, we can look at like for like in terms of property values. Then we have a target. Now, the rule of thumb is that we've got two types of target. We've got an auto-generated target, but we've got this one, which is manual. And it's really based on how much risk we think the property is incurring. So in other words, the higher the risk, the higher the gross rentable yield must be. Rentable yield is cost of property at our offer price, cost of property and rent, basically, or sorry, cost of property and renovation costs divided into rent income per year. And so based on these mechanics, the number is essentially, it's a simple calculation. It's based on the rent and the refurb, and we just extrapolate from there. And in this case, we're saying that for this property, they're asking 130, but in reality, it's only worth 110 to us because maybe it's an ex-local authority house, the location's not so good, and whilst it may yield high, it'll also be quite risky. What we're always looking for is the highest yielding, lowest risk properties possible. And having done this for a while, I've kind of Martin and I and the team have been able to quantify reward and risk quite nicely within a single metric, which is this gross rentable yield. Anyway, we then have all the fees. Now, the stamp duty is based on, in this case, foreign nationals, but might not be. So we can change that number. And then we've got the total cost with all the renovations, all the lawyers' costs, the whole thing. And that's a really important number to us. And then we've got the gross, the net yield. So this is the total cost of purchase divided into total income. And then we have the net cash ROI, which is total income, net income, excluding tax. So this would be lettings agents, a little money left aside for maintenance and insurance and so on. This would be your total return on income. So all your expenses basically divided into your total actual cost for purchase. And then we've got the net pre-tax income. So that's what you'd get out of this 145,000 or 110,000 pound property a year. So we're calculating everything based on we're calculating our ROI based on the as I said, the let's have a look. What happens to these numbers is like it kind of based on total cost, based on what we're prepared to offer. And then moving on, let's say the next thing is that you want to refinance in a few years' time. And in that case, we assume, for example, that interest rates are going to drop to a certain level. In this case, I think it'll be 5%. And there's a whole bunch of reasons, which I explained in another video, which if you're looking on the page about the buy-to-let strategy, cash strategy, you'll see the first video where I go into all the history of this. But essentially, for foreign nationals, I reckon it's going to be 5% in a couple of years' time. So you get this money back, and therefore your total outlay for this nice property would be 30,000. So you get 72% of all your money back. And assuming a rate of interest, your ROI would go from 5.13 to 5.61. So in other words, you've got to pay interest costs, but your ROI roughly works out the same. And the benefit here is that once you own that property, once you get the money out, of course, you can then go and buy another property. And then you get the benefit of capital gain across time. So there's an article I've written, which I constantly refer to, and this shows you the last crash cycle, and we're kind of around here. I don't expect this kind of crash, but when you adjust for inflation, property prices will go sideways, but relative to inflation, property prices will decline quite a lot. However, nominally, they won't decline much. That's my prediction and prediction of many others based on the way the market works. So let's say you refinance when interest rates drop, then as the market gradually recovers, because what'll happen is that affordability always tends to go back to let's say a general average. So here we've got affordability over the last 145 years. It generally tends to move back to say 6 times average, but affordability ratios vary depending on the area. Anyway, the main point is that once interest rates drop, you can then leverage your assets, you can buy more assets, and then you get the benefit of capital gain across all these assets, which is a good thing. And for the subsequent assets, you might employ a similar strategy, but I think once interest rates drop again, market will start picking up. But typically what happens is that people are so terrified of the future, they go, well, it'll never be good again. And markets go sideways, and that's obviously a good time to buy. Anyway, and then you get a far, far bigger ROI out of capital gain. And typically in a strong rising market, you'll get a 20% ROI, something like that, maybe more. It all depends on how the capital gain works. Then we have some other calculations which just help me understand costs and help clients understand all the numbers. And then we have some auto-calculated figures, which I use just as a guideline. And they're based on a whole load of variables, which we have lots of variables. These are renovation variables, and then we've got capital gain variables. A lot of this data comes from property data, which is quite helpful. And it's based on postcode district. So it just gives us some general idea of what's going on. But typically when we do our valuations, well, we always manually check, because property is like that. Every property is different, and it just takes a lot of time and knowledge, I suppose, to get these valuations right over time. The next thing is we've got some figures here. And for example, this is their asking cost per square meter, and their offer, or our offer. And then we can see some other figures here. For the postcode district, these are the averages per square meter. And then we have some other costs and so on. Now, the thing with a lot of these figures are they are useful very occasionally, so they sit at the bottom. But the most important number of all, I would say, is the renovation cost. Well, three numbers really. What do they want for it? What will it rent for is the fundamentally important, the most important number, because that drives everything. Renovation cost, obviously, and then what will it be worth when renovated? And then what do we want out of it? What yield? So to give you some context, a 3-bedroom semi-detached house in Swinton, Droylsden, somewhere like that, valued at, say, 100, and in fact, I can show you some numbers here because I have pulled these variables together. So this is an approximation based on a lot of work I've done with correlation analysis, and broadly, you would say that if you found a £75,000 property with a gross yield of 13-14%, it's likely that there are issues there. The weird thing about the market is that it's very self-leveling. In other words, properties which are high risk, generally speaking, have higher yield, and the converse is true. So these are the typical kind of target numbers. And I would say for a nice 3-bedroom semi-detached house in reasonable condition, we would want to be achieving 6.6 or 6.5. So going back into the deal calculator, we'll just take an example property, this one, and let's say it's 135. Yeah, and I think with good renovation, and so 6.8. Now that means that it's a nice house, nice area, will attract good tenants, and they'll be low risk, for instance. And that then affects all the calculations that we have. So that's how that works. And the idea is that, let's find me here. The idea is that when we're looking for properties on your behalf. We run the calcs and we just double check and make sure it all works. We then talk to you. Mickey agrees, by the way. He thinks it's very relevant. We then check the numbers and make sure that you're happy with them. If so, great. And then I start negotiating. And if we find a motivated seller, well, great. Then you might get a house that works at a sensible yield, and you got yourself a very nice investment. I think final thing to say is that when I've used all the calcs with the agents and I said, well, we're working to a yield here and our numbers are X, Y, and Z, then they know that we've done our homework and they're happy to talk to the vendor about offers. It's very different to just, well, what kind of discount could you give it to me for? That's not, doesn't mean anything, because then you're just asking for cheaper for no particular reason. So what I'm really hot on is being very clear as to the rationale behind why we offer whatever we offer. And it works. So anyway, there it is. Hopefully you'll start working with us and help us, or help you, more to the point, we'll help you find some really nice cash properties. And anyway, with that note, with that comment, Mickey wants some attention, so I got to look after him. And anyway, thank you very much and good investing. Cheers.